There are two broad types of regulatory policy. One is competitive regulatory policy, which is designed to limit the supply of goods and services to selected suppliers chosen from a larger number of competing potential suppliers. The other one is protective regulatory policy, which is intended to protect the public and consumers from negative effects of private activity and market problems.
Hello, my name is Edric, and I want to explain about the aim of protective regulatory policy and the characteristic of protective regulatory policy. The aim of this policy is protects the public by regulating private activities. This policy not only prohibiting certain actions, but also requiring some activities, for example, inspecting automobiles regulation, like its emission and etc. The characteristic of this policy are the main actors, are the committees and subcommittees of Congress, the full House and Senate, executive agencies, and business interest groups. The second characteristic is many of the policy cannot be relegated to a sub-government level. The third characteristic is most of environmental policy falls into the protective regulatory policy. This is because government is protecting the consumer from market problems, deceptive advertising, and negative externality.
So, Aceh has received special autonomy to implement law based on Islamic law as a formal law. Some of the violations regulated under Islamic criminal law include the production, consumption of alcoholic beverage, gambling, adultery, and same-sex relationship. Every offender who is prosecuted under this law is punished with caning, fines, or imprisonment.
Since Aceh's major population is a Muslim, Aceh has a special autonomy of regulation to govern the area. This special regulation aims to respect the Sharia culture as the major belief in that area. This regulation proposed by the government of Aceh and are proposed to protect the Muslims of Aceh from activities which is not allowed by Islam. In addition, the regulation also proposed to create convenience between each of individuals in Aceh.
Aceh is the first province in Indonesia to ever implement Sharia law. This leads to the different ways how people conduct their day-to-day life with other provinces. Because of Sharia law in Aceh, there are no cinemas and karaoke places, couples who are not married are not allowed to be seen together, women and men are not allowed to eat together, the utilization of Sharia police as well as the legal punishment of whip are allowed within the area. Although this law is essentially legal in Aceh, there are still debates surrounding the implementation of it that stems from human security and human rights. Since human security entails freedom for one and freedom for fear, the laws implemented still mongers and, for some argues, do not satisfy both freedoms.
I will mention the advantages and the disadvantages from this policy. The advantages is that the majority of people living in Aceh can practice their religion safely and freely because everything is according to the Sharia law. But the other hand, the disadvantages is that the human rights that are used equally in this country is disregarded in there because they have their own punishment and they have their own rules, and the non-Muslims living in Aceh can get the same punishment as a Muslim person.
Aceh policy is policy across aspects of population control by Chinese government, which means only one child law must control the country. It is intended to tackle social, economic, and environmental issues related to the rapidly developing population of the country.
Well, the one-child policy in China was first aimed in order to reduce or to flatten the curve of the high and uncontrolled birth rate, which was caused by the traditional assumption or the traditional belief that having one child means more fortune, more luck, and more blessings. However, that was not the case by the perspective of the government, which actually see these beliefs as the main causes of the high birth rate, which then causes so much social, economical, or political problems that is faced by the country. Thus, when one-child policy is implemented, it is actually implemented in a way that it will give reward for those people who comply and that obey the policy, while on the vice versa, when people are defying this policy, they will be sanctioned by the government.
The one-child policy in China is a unique example of regulatory policy, a policy and law that imposes that every family has a maximum one-child quota. The implementation of this regulatory policy has three ways: socially, law, and even through coercion. Socially, the government will spread propaganda like advertisement across the country to create a social norm that one-child family is the most prosperous way of living. This is also called family planning. Also, they also start spreading the use of birth control nationwide. And finally, creating a social informal sanction where women who birth one child is publicly praised, whereas women who birth more than one will not be accepted in any workplace. The usage of coercion or police force also is another implementation. This occurs when a family is found to be pregnant with a second child, the mother will be physically forced to abort or to be highly manipulated by institution to abort the child.
The main reason that the one-child policy was implemented in China because China has a population of nearly 1.5 billion people. They make up almost 20% of the entire world population. This is a scary number, especially because it has been consistently on the rise for decades. So one-child policy helps China to ease the overpopulation problem. Since its beginning, it has prevented over 400 million births and helped to ease the overpopulation problem. The biggest issue with the one-child policy in China is abortion, which children are being killed or abandoned, mostly girls. Since only one child can be had, the overwhelming majority want to have boys. Boys provide labor and money-making potential. Abortion rates are also tremendously high because if a couple already has a child, they are forced to abort it if they become pregnant with another.